I want to begin this morning by welcoming the deal struck last night between the Sinn Féin negotiating team in securing a timetable delivery of Gaeilge for citizens in the north. Irish speakers have been waiting for over 15 years for basic rights and recognition to be delivered. And I do note the fact that the leader of the DUP, Edwin Poots, has agreed to nominate for the position of First Minister this morning his nominee, Mr Gibbon, and I hope that that commitment is delivered upon. I want to wish my colleague Michelle O'Neill the very best as she takes up the position of Joint Head of Government again this afternoon. Taoiseach, yesterday we saw two significant reports published by the Central Bank and by the Central Statistic Office which show that house prices are continuing to rise and show no sign of abating. We see time and time again that the CSO's property price, and it shows it again yesterday, indicates that prices have increased by 4.5% statewide in the last 12 months. The Central Bank have said that the massive imbalance between supply and demand, and you'll know that this is a result of your government and Fine Gael's refusal to failure to adequately invest in housing over the past decade. Well, the Central Bank say that that is likely to fuel significant house price growth in the medium term. And this, of course, would have knock-on effects in rents. Homes are increasingly out of reach for ordinary workers and families. And this includes many people on decent incomes, and I genuinely think that the government simply doesn't get it. You simply don't understand the scale of the problem and the level of the anger that's out there. As houses continue to rise, the ability of renters and others to save, when so much of their pay packet is eaten up by rent and other living costs, is becoming even more difficult. To many, they see home ownership as now an impossible dream. Regrettably, that is an outlook that Fine Gael and the government have imposed on so many people. So we need to reverse this trend, Taoiseach, and we need to do it now. We need to start providing people with hope. We need to support people who cannot afford to move out of their family homes, supporting those paying exorbitant rents, support those struggling to access affordable accommodation or own their own home. Action must be taken, and it must be taken now. And that means supply-led solutions. And you know it is not just Sinn Féin that is saying this. Yesterday's report by the Central Bank and the CSO follow the ESRI's recent assessment that the state must and can double capital investment in housing, a policy that we in Sinn Féin have been calling on you in government for years to follow, only to be arrogantly dismissed by Fine Gael and by the government. Well, Taoiseach, it is time to implement our proposals. The government has an opportunity in Budget 2022 to truly make a difference for these ordinary workers and those struggling to buy a home. And in the interim, we need to see real action, Taoiseach, a real action to help those that have been caught in the rental trap. So can I ask you if you will take on board what we in Sinn Féin and the ESRI are advocating, that is the doubling of capital investment in homes that people can afford in October's budget. That is the bar we expect you to reach in October's budget. Can I ask you if you will even try? And will you move to ensure that renters are protected by a 3-year ban on rent increases?
Thanks very much, Deputy, for your question, and I want to start by joining you in welcoming the agreement that was made last night to appoint a new executive and a new First Minister, and Paul Gibbon, and the reappointment of Michelle O'Neill as Deputy First Minister co-equal and joint heads of the administration in Northern Ireland. And despite the fact the title may suggest otherwise, they are joint leaders of that administration in the north, and should be treated as such, and look forward to meeting them both on Friday should the NMSC go ahead. And I want to welcome the fact that we have agreement on an Irish Language Act on Gaeilge going ahead, as well as increased legal protections and rights for Ulster Scots speakers. This should not threaten anyone's identity. It's supported by the majority of parties and the majority of people in Northern Ireland. There's a Welsh Act in Wales, a Scottish Language Act in Scotland, Irish Language Acts here, and it has been a long time coming. A commitment made by the sovereign governments in St Andrews a long time ago, a commitment made by the parties in Northern Ireland to each other, and I look forward to seeing everyone honour their commitments in regard to language rights and language legislation within the next year. On the issue of home ownership, let there be no doubt about this. I'm somebody who believes in home ownership. My party does. This government does. Over 65% of people in Ireland own their own homes. We've one of the higher rates of home ownership in the developed world. That's not because of Sinn Féin, it's because of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. But the problem we face is that that's not a reality for the vast majority of younger people today. And by younger people, I don't just mean people in their 20s and 30s, I often mean people in their 40s as well. It has got that bad. And it's our mission over the next 3 years to turn that around and make home ownership a reality again for many more people than it is the case today. In terms of property prices, you're correct to say that they are going up. They went up by about 4.5% in the last year. But it is worth pointing out at least that notwithstanding that, home values in Ireland are still lower than they were, substantially lower than they were when they peaked 14 years ago. And what's happened, essentially, in my view, is the central bank rules have been successful in putting a lid on house prices. House prices are less than they were 14 years ago, but they've caused rents to soar. And that is a real problem. And it's created a perverse situation and a real paradox for a lot of people, that houses are cheaper to buy than they were 14 years ago, but people can't get mortgage approval. They can't get adequate mortgage approval to buy that home. So they now end up paying more in rent than they would do if they're able to get an adequate mortgage. And I do welcome the fact that the central bank is now reviewing this policy. I appreciate that it is complex. There is a concern that if we allow people to secure larger mortgages, that may cause house prices to rise, and nobody wants that to happen. At the same time, it may actually drive supply. It may actually get developers and builders into the space where they're building properties for amounts that people can afford if they get those mortgages. But that all has to be worked out, and I do think there is a potential role for government in all of this, and looking at models like they have in the Netherlands, for example, where the government provides partial guarantees for first-time buyers buying mortgages for reasonably priced houses to protect them against negative equity. And I think perhaps we can examine models in that regard. In terms of your question on increasing the budget for housing, we've done that. And we are doing that. We've increased it dramatically. 2016, 600 social houses built in the country. 2019, 2020, more like 6,000. So there's been a tenfold increase in the building of social housing by the state and its agencies in that brief period. Once we had the money to do it, we did. And we will build on that, and you'll see the details of that in Housing for All when it's published.
Taoiseach, you never fail to surprise me. Seriously, like the language that you're coming out with today about that it's not as bad as it was 14 years ago, like, do you know where ordinary people are at in your own constituency? In Dublin-based South, do you know what people are asked to pay for to buy their own home? There is a serious problem, and the problem isn't what you're suggesting, bigger mortgages. The problem is what the ESRI, the Central Bank, Sinn Féin, and many others have been saying. The issue isn't about stimulating more demand, which will push up house prices. The demand is there. Listen to ordinary people. It is about dealing with the supply. So that's what the ESRI is saying. Double capital investment from where it is today, Taoiseach. Don't skirt around the issue. Double capital investment from where it is today. This is a man-made problem. Indeed, your government has created this problem. When you decide not to build houses over the last decade in the volume that was required, then we have a situation, as the central bank points out, the imbalance between supply and demand, which is pushing up house prices, and they are telling homeowners that this is going to continue. So I put to you again, will you commit to doubling investment in capital investment in this year's budget, and will you give that relief to renters by freezing rents for the next 3 years?
Thanks very much, Deputy. I think you're trying to misrepresent what I said, and that's exactly what you did the last time we discussed the issue of housing in this chamber, and unfortunately you were partially successful in that regard, and that's a poor reflection on you, but also a poor reflection on others who accept your spin too often when it comes to the issue of housing. But again, to answer your question, the government has already dramatically increased investment in social housing. We will do so more. You'll see the details of that in Housing for All when it is published. Social housing benefits everyone. It gets people off the housing list into social housing. It frees up more properties for other people to rent, thus bringing down rents. And it means that there's less competition for first-time buyers and people who are upgrading. So social housing is a good investment. It benefits everyone in society, not just those who receive social housing. But what the most people want in Ireland, or the majority of people want in Ireland, is to own their own home. And we have to look at that end of things as well, because it's not just one simple solution that solves all these problems. This is a complex area and requires a lot of different policy interventions. So yes, more social housing, absolutely, and please vote for it on local authorities. We do, you don't. It also involves cost rental. It also involves affordable housing schemes. But it does involve the building of more private homes that people can actually buy, because that's what the vast majority of people want.